The strike that shook the Middle East, the killing of Qassem Soleimani, a shadow war in plain sight for years. It had been a quiet war, no declared, no televised as a war, but real explosions in shipping lanes, rocket attacks on military bases, sanctions tightening like a vise, cyber attacks and covert operations. By late 2019, tensions between the United States and Iran were at their highest point in decades. The nuclear deal had collapsed. Sanctions were crushing Iran's economy. Iran had begun scaling back compliance with nuclear restrictions. The relationship was no longer diplomatic strain. It was strategic confrontation. And at the center of that confrontation stood one man, Major General Qassem Soleimani. Who was Qassem Soleimani? To understand the gravity of the 3rd of January 2020, you have to understand who he was. Soleimani was the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Irgc Quds Force, Iran's elite unit responsible for foreign operations. He was not merely a general, he was a strategist, a regional power broker, a symbol of Iran's projection of influence across the Middle East. Under his leadership, Iran expanded influence in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, through Hezbollah, Yemen, by Houthi rebels. To many in Iran, he was a national hero who fought ISIS and defended regional allies. Officials, he was responsible for orchestrating attacks against American forces and supporting armed groups designated as terrorist organizations. The United States formally designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization in 2019, the first time it labeled part of another country's military that way. Soleimani was no ordinary military figure. He was a state-level actor operating in the gray space between warfare and diplomacy. The escalation before the strike, the months leading up to January 2020, were volatile. In May 2018, the U.S. withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPO, the nuclear deal signed in 2015. Sanctions were reimposed under a maximum pressure strategy. Iran's economy contracted sharply. Oil exports plummeted. The Iranian currency collapsed in value. In 2019, tensions escalated further. Oil tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman. Iran shot down a U.S. surveillance drone. The U.S. blamed Iran for attacks on Saudi oil facilities. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq increased rocket attacks on bases housing U.S. personnel. On the 27th of December 2019, a rocket attack on a military base in Kirkuk, Iraq, killed an American contractor and wounded several U.S. service members. The U.S. responded with airstrikes on Kataib Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia in Iraq. Days later, protesters and militia members stormed the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. The embassy attack echoed the 1979 hostage crisis, politically and psychologically. The situation was combustible. The 3rd of January 2020, the strike in the early hours of the 3rd of January 2020. A U.S. MQ-9 Reaper Drive-1 fired missiles at a convoy leaving Baghdad International Airport. Inside the vehicles, Qassem Soleimani, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, deputy commander of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, several others affiliated with Iranian-backed militias. The strike killed them instantly. The operation had been authorized by U.S. President Donald Trump. The Pentagon stated that Soleimani was planning imminent attacks on American personnel. Iran denied the claim. The strike was extraordinary. The United States had targeted and killed a senior military official of a sovereign nation, not during a declared war. This was not a battlefield accident. It was a deliberate assassination of a high-ranking state actor. The world reacted immediately. Immediate global reactions. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, declared 3 days of mourning. Millions attended Soleimani's funeral processions across multiple cities. Iran vowed severe revenge. The killing was framed as an act of war. The Iraqi government condemned the strike as a violation of sovereignty. Parliament passed a non-binding resolution calling for the expulsion of U.S. troops. United States reaction inside the U.S. was divided. Supporters argued Soleimani was responsible for American deaths. The strike reestablished deterrence. It prevented future attacks. Critics argued the strike risked full-scale war. Evidence of imminent threat was unclear. Congressional authorization was bypassed. Legal scholars debated whether the strike complied with international law and domestic war powers. International communities. European leaders urged de-escalation. NATO paused training missions in Iraq, Russia, and China, criticized the U.S. The United Nations Secretary General warned of regional instability. Markets reacted sharply. Oil prices surged temporarily. The Middle East braced for retaliation. Iran's retaliation. On the 8th of January 2020, Iran launched ballistic missiles at 2 U.S. bases in Iraq, Al-Assad and Erbil. It was the first time Iran had directly targeted U.S. forces with ballistic missiles. No U.S. personnel were killed, but over 100 service members were later diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries due to blast concussions. Iran signaled through diplomatic channels that the retaliation was proportionate and concluded. The U.S. did not respond with additional military escalation. For the moment, open war was avoided. But the damage had been done. The legal and strategic debate. The strike raised fundamental questions. Was it legal under U.S. law? The administration cited the 2002 authorization for use of military force, OMF regarding Iraq. Critics argued it stretched the law beyond its intended scope. Was it legal under international law? The U.S. invoked self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Some international law experts questioned whether the standard of imminent threat was met. Did it restore deterrence or destroy it? Supporters claimed it re-established American red lines. Critics warned it normalized targeted killings of senior officials. The strategic doctrine of deterrence was being tested in real time. Long-term consequences. 1. Increased regional proxy attacks by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria continued in subsequent years. 2. Nuclear acceleration. Shortly after the strike, Iran announced it would no longer adhere to JCPOA operational limits. Enrichment levels increased beyond prior caps. Diplomacy became more fragile. 3. Iraq's political instability. The strike intensified debates about U.S. troop presence. Iraq was caught between Washington and Tehran. 4. Targeted killing precedent. The strike marked one of the most significant targeted killings of a state military official in modern history. It altered norms regarding acceptable state conduct. 5. Domestic political effects in the U.S. The strike became part of broader debates about executive war powers. In Iran, it strengthened hardline factions. Strategic assessment. Years later, did the strike weaken Iran? Short term, it removed a key operational strategist. It disrupted networks temporarily. Long term, Iran's regional influence did not collapse. The Quds Force leadership transitioned. Proxy networks remained active. Did it deter attacks? The answer remains debated. Some argue it reset escalation dynamics. Others argue it entrenched hostility. The human dimension. Soleimani's death was not just geopolitical, it was symbolic. To many Iranians, it represented foreign aggression. To families of us, soldiers killed by Iranian-backed groups, it represented accountability. Both narratives exist simultaneously. A defining moment, the killing of Qassem Soleimani, was one of the most consequential acts in U.S.-Iran relations since 1979. It demonstrated the reach of American military technology, the volatility of regional rivalries, the fragility of deterrence. It did not lead to full-scale war, but it did deepen a cycle of confrontation. The strike was not an endpoint, it was a turning point. And in the ongoing story of US-Iran tensions, the 3rd of January, 2020 remains a date that reshaped strategic calculations across the Middle East and redefined how far two adversaries were willing to go without formally declaring war. If you found this documentary insightful and grounded in facts, don't just watch and scroll away. Like this video to support in-depth, research-driven geopolitical storytelling. Comment below. Do you think the strike prevented a larger war, or did it deepen the conflict? Subscribe for more powerful breakdowns of the events shaping global history. Stay informed, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next story.